everybody, and welcome to Unmuzzled, a podcast, all things animals, all the time. Today, one of my all-time favorite guests. I'm not gonna lie, Paul. When we did the last podcast, you are such like a magnet. You know, people just love you because you are a personality and you have great stories. But I'm so excited to have you. So Paul sent me a new book that is actually free. Now, if you go to Amazon, it's $1.99. We won't talk about all that, Paul. I know that you wanted to give this book away so that people could see this. But this is a book that is remnants of the last podcast that we talked about, which was about pet cemeteries and pet memorials throughout the world. But first of all, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me on, because I'm in love with this topic and I'm delighted to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. And I know too, I don't want to, bury the lead. We talked about your cat a lot last time, but you now have a new kitten, I believe, named Willow.
Well, I do, but because this is a dog show, we'll pretend she's like a special breed of Cocker Spaniel. Let me grab her. Hold on.
Okay.
So yeah, this is my new puppy.
She's adorable. And good for your heart, right?
Yeah, she is. Because the other one that I had for a long time died, and I suppose in a way it's ironic that, it happened after we had talked before. It's ironic that a guy who wrote a book about pet cemeteries pretty soon after the book came out needed to find a pet cemetery.
Yeah.
But that's how it goes. We all go through that.
Yeah, it's so hard. So the new book is called Go West, Young Dog. You sent me a bunch of pictures, and then I went to your Instagram because I'm like, I'm just going to catch up on Paul's world. I follow you already, but you know how the algorithm does that. This is incredible. And I think, last time we talked about how hungry people are for the history of pets, or how people bury pets in other lands, like things in the United States that we would maybe second guess or think is weird. This is really like the pictures tell so much of the story, but tell us how this came to be and kind of how you're offering it up, which I love.
Well, it literally is incredible in the meaning of the term, as in unbelievable, and I think that's part of the reason that a lot of these stories aren't known, because they do come across to us as so unbelievable. In terms of how I got to this topic, back when I was working on the book about pet cemeteries, I was, searching for stories in the 19th century about dogs and graves. And I kept finding these stories about dogs and trains, and they really didn't fit in a book about pet cemeteries. Yes, all the dogs were by then dead, but the story wasn't in how they died. It was in how they lived. And we're talking about a group of dogs, a substantial group of stray dogs that just gave up on city life, and they started traveling around the United States on trains. They were doing this all around the world. Actually, this photo you're showing now is an Australian railroad dog. They were found in Australia, they're found in the UK, they're found in Europe, but they took on an added meaning in the United States. By the 1860s, the trains had come to dominate American life. The trains were basically establishing a new American mythos. The trains were like the trains in American mythology. Yeah, here's a dog on a produce train. The trains in American mythology are kind of like the dragons of yore in Europe. They were these big beasts that belched out smoke, and they shook the land as they traveled, and they brought civilization to these far-flung areas in the United States. And especially in the 1860s, after the Civil War, the United States was united again as a country, and for the first time in the 1860s, we completed a transcontinental railroad. So in the United States, the railroads were this very big thing symbolically. They represented national unity, and they represented progress and manifest destiny. And these dogs that rode on these trains, they turned their backs on the hard life of the cities on the East Coast, and they just took off. They were all strays. And they just started traveling the country. And okay, we can say, that's interesting enough, but they take on this added value as well, because first of all, in doing that, they're written up in the newspapers. They become America's first true canine celebrities. They are that. before these railroad dogs, famous dogs were dogs that cost a lot. A Saint Bernard that cost $10,000 would be in the newspaper, but that was for the society crowd. These were the first canine celebrities for normal people because they were just mutts. But they also become, and this is the vital point in the United States, they become heroes to a lot of people. For people who, the morality of the time is that, you couldn't just be a hobo. You couldn't just run off and be whoever you wanted to be. You had, you were kind of stuck in these low-paying menial jobs, basically indentured servitude, usually on the East Coast. And, Go West young man meant go west, but with a purpose. And these dogs were just kind of living, they were on the road decades before on the road. They were living this kind of like existential life of freedom. And people would read these stories about them. They kind of project themselves into these stories the way we might now project ourselves into like a Spider-Man movie or something. Like, I wish that could be me. I wish I had that freedom. I wish I had that power to just go off and be who I wanted. And people would project this onto these dogs, and they became heroes for a lot of people. As they travel, people would put little tags on their collars to show where they had been, so people could, reconstruct their entire path. And in this way, these dogs, they become this kind of network, this vast network, this web that attaches disparate people from all parts of the country who had never met each other. And it's a remarkable story, a remarkable piece of canine history, and a remarkable piece of Americana that we've forgotten just because we tell history from a human perspective rather than from a canine perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I helped with a lost dog. Oh, it was during COVID, and this dog was on the run. And, we finally figured out through sightings that he was following railroad tracks. And I think we see that a lot with dogs, is that they try to, when they're lost, follow something. So it's almost, and it's also very dangerous because we've seen a lot of dogs hit on railroad tracks because that's what they tend to do. But it's almost amazing how the dogs found the trains and then were welcomed onto them by the people working on them.
Well, the crews loved them, because at the time it's like, let's face it, in the 1890s, these guys, what do they have? They board a train for, the crew members. I'm talking about the crew members board a train for 1,000 miles, and they've got nothing but a newspaper. This is before modern entertainment. And so the crews loved these dogs. And that was a big part of it. The crews welcomed these dogs on. It's counterintuitive now. Nowadays, if a stray animal tries to get on a train or a plane or a bus, they're going to kick them right off. But back then, they welcomed them on. They loved having them around because they were company. And that was part of it for the dogs. I like to say that, back in the 19th century, humane society was a contradiction in terms more than it was in organization. The big cities were dangerous places for these animals. Strays were not welcome. Dogs were sadly oftentimes put into hard labor as pack animals in some of the big cities, or pulling carts. There were these things called turnspits. And they would take stray dogs and they would put them in these giant hamster wheels, and they'd throw hot coals at their feet, and they'd be forced to run. And these turnspits would be hooked up to spits of meat, and that's how they would turn the meat around to cook it. There were also organized bands of people with rifles who'd go around the city to shoot strays, to call the number of stray dogs. And so the cities were very dangerous places for a stray. And so they found not only a sense of freedom, they found a sense of safety on the railroads. And yes, you talked about dogs being hit by trains. It was incredibly dangerous. Many of these dogs died hit by trains, but they died the way they wanted to live. They died free. And in this way, they become this kind of like metaphor for existential freedom. And that's why people are so attracted to their stories.
Yeah. And I remind me in your last book, the story of the dog that lived at I think he lived at the train station, or he kept going back to his owner that passed away. That reminds me of this a little bit, because this is a railroad dog that has a tombstone, which is amazing.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of stories around the world. Like, people are familiar with the famous Japanese dog, of course, who waited for his master at the train station, who never came back. Well, there are a lot of stories like that. Believe me, it's just something that dogs do. They do mourn their owners. And there was a very famous dog named Shep in Montana who did the exact same thing.
Mhm.
But we're talking about here, we're talking about dogs who actually rode the trains. And it's a different lifestyle. I mean, they were canine vagabonds riding around the country. And I think it's part of the reason that this story has fallen out of history. I said at the start, you said incredible, and it really is, because it boggles the imagination. It's like, how do these dogs navigate? We have to it makes us, I think, in some ways reconsider what these animals are capable of and what canine exceptionalism really amounts to. There was the first famous railroad dog, really, really famous, like national celebrity level. So famous that this dog was actually kidnapped into a circus because they were selling tickets to, he was dog napped into a circus in Buffalo because he was so famous that they wanted to sell tickets for people to come out and see him. And his name was Railroad Jack. And there was a religious paper at the time that admitted what a lot of people are kind of probably afraid to admit, that this dog's ability to navigate around the country and to tell which way he's going and to board the proper train, it makes us question what the distinction is between the human and the beast, because this dog could accomplish things that even a human being that had not studied railroad schedules intensely would not be able to do. This dog in 1892, he took off from Buffalo on the 4th of July, and it becomes his summer run across the United States in 1892. It really pushed the railroad dogs to front pages of the newspaper, because before this dog, Railroad Jack, they were kind of for the back pages and the people who read the back pages in the Sunday papers, and they'd keep up with stuff like this. They were niche, and he makes them front page because he leaves on 4th of July, 1892 from Buffalo, and he travels all the way by himself, all the way across the United States to San Francisco. He meets with the press in San Francisco. They put him up at the most posh hotel in the city. Wells Fargo puts him up because he was traveling on the Wells Fargo Express trains. And that cross-country run, every stop was verified by people he met en route. He had 44 tags on his collar, all his stops en route to the West Coast, and he does it all the way on his own. It's an incredible story.
I love that. I just love how people piece that story together. I mean, it's amazing. And then through your research, you even pieced it together more.
His story, though, because so let me give you even a more backstory to this dog. He had been doing this for an entire career. He was already famous. Like, if you were into railroad dogs, I compare him to like the Brad Pitt of railroad dogs. He was that big a deal. He was the biggest one yet. And then in 1892, he becomes even bigger because of this cross-country run. And so he was, at that point, he was dying. It was known that he was dying. He was an old, ailing dog. And again, it really makes you question canine exceptionalism and what they're truly capable of doing. Did this dog know he was dying? Was he taking a last lap and turning it into this last hurrah? There's this newspaper article about him that year before he takes off, and it mentions how he's in such terrible condition, and he's like a gouty old man, and he limps when he walks, and he moves very slowly. But it also mentions that he is now traveling faster than he has ever traveled in his career, and it really makes you wonder. It's like, is he aware of his mortality to the point that he is putting on this one final show for the American public, or simply for himself, just to like I said, turn the last lap into a last hurrah? And as he's traveling westbound, like I said, he was already famous, and he's this dying dog who's taking this last lap around the country. And people responded to it. They really responded to it like he is a true celebrity. Everywhere he stopped, there would be these big crowds waiting to meet this dog. And they're giving him gifts, these bizarre gifts that that a dog could never use. They gave him a human skull with a note on it that said, "I hope the soul of this skull will help you on your travels." A giant-sized woman's shoe. Someone gave him a cannonball or or something like that. They gave him 4 canes, one for each leg. They gave him a razor as if he needs a shave. They gave him all this stuff, and the crews just have to pack it into these suitcases, and he just kept going. But it was part of the love and affection for this dog. Like I said, he was a true celebrity. People are offering him these things, like he's, this little canine deity come into their midst. These dogs were really that famous. And in fact, this dog was so famous that, again, he's totally forgotten nowadays. But America's first true canine celebrities, what is the measure of celebrity in American culture? Someone's trying to sell you, right? So this dog had his own he had his own brand of shoes. They were called Railroad Jack shoes. And I found the logo art in the National Archives. Someone had copyrighted the logo art to his brand of shoes, this dog's brand of shoes. And I guess the idea is maybe that they're a good footwear for traveling, maybe. There was a company called Johnson's Anodyne Liniment, and it was this, like a curative liniment for body aches. And they kind of hijacked him and made postcards of him sitting next to a package of their product with this caption that said, famous Railroad Jack, the canine traveler, never goes anywhere without Johnson's Anodyne Liniment, and he rubs it on his body every day. Oh, of course he does, but he was that big a celebrity that people were, like I said, isn't that the truest measure of celebrity in American culture? Is someone's trying to capitalize on you? And in fact, when that dog dies, 1492, sorry, jinxed year. 1892 is his big run around the country. He comes back to Albany. I'm sorry, he started in Albany, not Buffalo. He comes back to Albany. He winds up dying there several months later in 1893. And after he dies, this company, Johnson's Anodyne Liniment, they put these fake, they buy space in the newspapers in upstate New York, because he dies in Albany, it's where he's from. In upstate New York, they buy space in the newspapers, and they plant not advertisements, but fake newspaper stories about, Railroad Jack is dead, and Johnson's Anodyne Liniment is so devastated by the loss of their pal, but they have these postcards of him. And if you send in a proof of purchase of Johnson's Anodyne Liniment, we will send you one of these postcards of this famous dog. Like I said, big celebrity who's forgotten about, completely forgotten about now.
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, that poor.
And so, a testament to the power of his dog, a testament to his fame.
And I think it's also interesting, in this day and age, everybody's trying to make their pet famous, on social media. For a dog to legitimately be famous for traveling a train is simply incredible if you think about it big picture. It's just amazing. As always, Paul, amazing. So you have this book for free because
free-ish.
Yeah.
Free-ish. So in my naivete, when I finished the book about Pet Cemetery, since this research had come out of the Pet Cemetery book, and I was like, well, I want to tell the stories about these dogs, but I don't want to turn it into a commercial product. I don't want to be like Johnson's Anodyne Liniment. And so I decided, if you have a book contract, usually the publisher has rights of refusal to your next book. So I wrote a deliberately terrible, utterly confusing proposal for a book about railroad dogs that I sent to my publisher just to get them to turn it down. And when they turned it down, I was free and I could do with it whatever I wanted. And I was like, well, I'm going to make a free ebook that I'm going to put on Amazon that people can just take for free, just because all I care about, I don't want any money. I just want to tell the stories of the dogs and kind of, restore to them some bit of their place in history. And it turns out that it's really hard to give things away for free on corporate-owned platforms. So Amazon, it is free if you have like Kindle Unlimited. Otherwise, it's $1.99 because of the file size, because of the pictures in it. But what I have promised everybody is that if you spend $1.99 on this book and you don't think it's worth $1.99, you write to me and I will send you $2. And I mean that. And so far, no one has asked for their $2. I really believe in these dogs.
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement too on your social media. I saw when you posted about it, but I think the key that you said is that freedom is what these dogs stood for, and that's why you wanted to make the book free. And just the pictures alone are amazing, and then to see some of the stories behind them, it's just incredible work by you.
Well, they are. I mean, these dogs are symbols of this kind of existential freedom, because it's like if you look at, I think these dogs still have something to teach us as people, and especially as Americans. When those rail lines were completed, the transcontinental rail lines, everybody acted like, oh, this is going to give us the freedom we've been longing for and the prosperity we've been longing for. No, it didn't. It made the rich people richer. And then the cars came along, and they were, the cars were going to make everybody more free, and they were going to give us the freedom we've longed for, and they were going to make everybody prosperous. And did it happen? No, of course it didn't. And, and now we're at another juncture in history, I think, with a lot of technology that people are looking at thinking it's like, this is going to make us more free, and this is going to give us the freedom and prosperity we've always wanted. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I think these dogs have a lesson to teach us because they found it. These dogs found on those trains by not looking at freedom as a goal, by making freedom simply a choice of life, simply living for living free rather than pursuing freedom as a goal. They found it. They found what we have always thought we've been looking for. And I think these dogs have something to teach us. I really think. And anybody who's been around animals long enough knows that they can teach us a lot. I just think these dogs have something to teach us. And I wanted that book to be free, or at least as accessible as possible.
$1.99. I mean, you can't beat it. And please, the biggest thing is if you go to Paul's Instagram, which you see on the bottom of the screen, I'll also link it when I put the text copy in if you're listening to this right now. But, the other items on Paul's Instagram are amazing. If you're interested in how people memorialize pets and pet cemeteries throughout the world, it's not for the faint of heart at some junctures, but again, Paul teaches us things that we don't normally see, which I love. And like this, Paul, if you didn't expose these dogs in railroads, and I believe there was a cat in one of the pictures I saw that you have on your Instagram.
Yeah, that's a great cat. It's an engineer who's holding both a dog and a cat. The cats did not like riding the trains.
Yeah.
I think for it's like I kind of say for standard issue house cats who are very who are very obsessively grooming themselves, like sitting on a coal pile and having all the junk from a train fall on them is probably something you don't really like. The cats didn't like it, but for the dogs it was a way of life.
Yeah. But thank you, honestly, for putting this in front of our eyes. Again, these are things, honestly, that we don't normally see. So I really appreciate it. And I know that you're starting to do a little bit of rescue work with animals too. And I really appreciate that as an animal rescuer over here in Chicago.
Well, yeah. So I mentioned this to you. I live out in Nevada, and a lot of unwanted dogs get dumped out in the desert. And I know the desert. I have a Jeep. I do a lot of off-roading, and so I've been called in on a lot of cases to track down dogs that have been dumped out in the desert by callous owners, and we've brought in more than we failed, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, the lost dog community here in Chicagoland it's just amazing, and when you get to work with somebody like you that does, goes to the ends of the earth to help save an animal, it really is key. And it's key because time is of the essence, especially in the desert. I mean, that's a whole...
Well, especially out here in the summer. I mean, yeah, there was one that I tracked this one on foot for 14 miles last summer. It was like 110 degrees. I was kind of like, I remember it was a Labrador Retriever, and it kept looking back at me. Kind of like, you're not really still there, are you? It's like, yeah, I mean, it's here. At one point I said to that dog, it's like, one of us gives up first. It's either you or me, and it's not going to be me. And eventually that dog did. And that dog was, I want to tell you, that dog was the sweetest dog. So eventually I kind of turned that dog back. And it's not just me, obviously, it's a crew of people. And I was the tracker. And I turned that dog back, and it was headed back towards the highway, and I radioed it in. She's coming. She's coming. Just get a trap down, put some food and water in it, get it down there right at the, I sent them some coordinates. And they did that, and everyone backed away. And the dog just went right into the trap, just gave herself up. And they put her. They have a kind of like a doggy ambulance, this rescue crew, and they put her in there. And I told them, I tracked this dog 14 miles. I want to meet this dog. And so I went in there. They closed the doors. It's me and the dog. So the dog, in case the dog's going to jump, which it wasn't at that point in time. It was done. And I opened up that cage, and that dog just came right out and started looking at me. You know, it was like that dog had wanted to give itself up, but its experience with human beings was so damaging to it that it was afraid. And it finally, I think, through this ordeal of that rescue, had come to the point that it decided, I've got to trust somebody. I'm going to trust these people.
I love that.
And that dog has been adopted. That dog was the sweetest dog. It was adopted. It went to a great home, and I was just so proud of that rescue.
Yeah. And proud of yourself. You should be, because that takes patience and time. That's for sure. Go West, young dog. Everybody, please go follow Paul. Again, here is his Instagram. But if you're on Amazon and you're listening to this, Go West, young dog. It's incredible. The pictures alone are amazing. And then to see some of the stories behind it. Paul, you're always a great guest. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
You're so welcome. Paul, everybody, honestly, check out that book. It is so good, and he is brilliant. If you can stomach looking at some pet cemetery and pet memorials across the world, it's a little bit tough to look at sometimes, but honestly, you learn so much from Paul, and he does the research for all of us and then lays it out brilliantly. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. I will see you next time. Bye.